Western governments, including the UK, attack what they claim are Russian spies hacking into governments and institutions around the world. The Dutch unmasked 4 men accused of being Russian spies, and the equipment it's claimed was used to hack into the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog. Here it's claimed Russia hacked into the Porton-Down chemical weapons facility. Both organisations had been investigating the Novichok attacks.
If anyone had any questions in their mind about Russian military involvement in the Salisbury attacks, this will put to rest those doubts.
Russia is also accused of mounting cyber attacks against the US, Switzerland and Malaysia. Russia has denied it all, calling it Western spy mania. We'll have the very latest. Also tonight, a man is jailed for trafficking children, forcing them to deal drugs. The search for the missing in the Indonesian tsunami as the death toll rises to 1,500. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Western governments have mounted an unprecedented and coordinated fight back against a series of cyber attacks carried out, they claim, by Russian spies on governments and key institutions around the world. The Dutch claim 4 spies from Russian intelligence hacked into the headquarters of the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog in The Hague. It was at a time the watchdog was investigating the Novichok attack in Salisbury. Russia's also been accused of cyber attacks on organisations here, including the Foreign Office and the Porton-Down chemical weapons facility. And the US has charged 7 people after claims that a nuclear facility and its anti-doping agency were hacked. Russia has denied it all, dismissing it as Western spy mania. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera reports from The Hague.
Caught in the act, the moment 4 Russian spies were detained in the Netherlands. Their plan, to use the equipment in the boot of their car to hack into computer networks. The story was made public today in an extraordinary joint British and Dutch news conference in which the details were laid bare and the finger pointed at the GRU, Russian military intelligence.
It can no longer be allowed to act aggressively across the world against vital international organisations with apparent impunity.
This is where the Russians were caught, in this hotel car park in The Hague in April of this year. The reason they were here is because just next door is the headquarters of the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. At the time, the OPCW was investigating the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in Salisbury, as well as a chemical attack in Syria. The Salisbury attack would eventually lead to the death of Dawn Sturgis and has been blamed on Russia. The 4 Russians arrived on April 10th. They were using diplomatic passports and carrying €20,000 and $20,000. They were secretly photographed carrying out reconnaissance of the OPCW the next day. In the boot of their car, they had what's called close access equipment. This would allow them to intercept passwords as OPCW staff logged into their computers so that the Russians could break into the systems. But the Dutch, with help from the British, had been watching and waiting.
We were watching that closely at that moment, and as soon as we had the idea that the equipment was getting working, we disrupted the operation.
And you're confident that this is Russian military intelligence, the GRU?
We are 100% confident that this is the GRU, Russian intelligence, yes.
So what ties them to the GRU? Their phones were activated close to a GRU base. One even carried a taxi receipt from outside a GRU base in Moscow to the airport from the day they left. And information on the laptop of one of the men, pictured here, links his computer directly to a series of cyber attacks, including into the investigation of the downed Malaysian MH17 flight and the hacking of athletes' data from the World Anti-Doping Agency. Today, the British government also detailed other cyber attacks linked to the GRU, which hit businesses across Europe, even a small TV station in the UK.
The way that we are going to prevent an escalation is by making sure when this kind of thing happens that Russia knows that it's a red line, that there are consequences, that the price is going to be too high.
And in the final coordinated move, this afternoon the US Department of Justice issued its own detailed indictments against 7 GRU officers for a range of cyber attacks, focusing particularly on sporting bodies.
Well, our security correspondent Gordon Carrera is still in The Hague. We'll speak to him in a moment. But first to Moscow and our correspondent Steve Rosenberg. Steve, a very dismissive reaction there from the Kremlin. Is there any sense that Russia is worried about any of this?
Not so much. I mean, in Russia today, they reacted with the kind of bluster and derision that we've come to expect from the authorities here whenever Moscow is accused of something by the international community. So, for example, the Russian Foreign Ministry declared that spy mania in the West has gone into overdrive, and it dismissed British claims of GRU cyber attacks, a very long list, as a diabolical cocktail of perfumes in one bottle, produced by a vivid imagination. Now, the story is being reported in the state media here, but it's being presented as part of a new anti-Russian hysteria, a wave of hysteria in the West, and as a story which lacks evidence. But the BBC has now confirmed that at least 2 of those alleged Russian military intelligence officers named by the Netherlands were registered in Moscow at a facility owned by the Russian Defense Ministry.
And Gordon, in The Hague, the level of detail in the allegations coming out from The Hague today is astonishing. What's likely to happen next in terms of action against Russia?
Well, today was unprecedented. Counter-espionage operations, catching spies, are normally top-secret operations. So to see the level of detail we had today was remarkable. And you could sense from the Dutch officials the anger they felt at the Russians operating on their soil, similar to what Britain felt about Salisbury. And Britain's Foreign Office and Portendown Laboratory were also targeting a different type of cyber operation. The hope will be that 3 countries, the US, the UK, the Netherlands, revealing these details will help expose GRU activities. But is exposing them the same as stopping them? Officials I've spoken to know that they have Moscow under pressure, and they'll be hoping that by doing so they can raise the costs for Moscow in carrying out these kind of cyber activities. But they also know that Moscow does not easily back down.
Gordon Carrera in The Hague and Steve Rosenberg in Moscow, thank you both.